of shadows.
Hi my angels, it's Hailey Reese and welcome to or welcome back to my channel. I hope that you guys are having an absolutely fantastic morning, afternoon, or night, whatever it is for you. I am so excited that you are here tuning into today's video because today's video is absolutely fascinating and is one of the most thought-provoking videos I've done as of recently. It has left me with so many questions, my mind's going to a million places, and I'm so excited to share it with you guys today and hear all of your theories as to how you think this could have happened. I don't know about you watching this video, but for me, growing up, Titanic was one of my absolute favorite movies. I can't even count the amount of times that I watched that movie throughout my childhood and even as of lately. I mean, it's been a while since I have watched the movie. Maybe now after this video, I'll go back and rewatch it. But I just remember every single time the movie would come to a close, I would sit there in silence for a few minutes just thinking about the fact that this isn't just a movie. This is a real tragedy that occurred, and it always blew my mind that this was the horror that truly occurred to those on board the Titanic. But what if I told you that it appears the sinking of the Titanic was written about by a small town author 14 years before the tragedy struck? Yes, you heard that right. So that's what we're going to dive into today. The novel that is eerily similar to the tragedy of the Titanic, and I want to know all of your guys' theories by the end of today's video. But make sure you guys watch to the end because there are so many shocking similarities in this book to the Titanic and the tragedy that would occur. So I'm pretty sure that you're already aware of the Titanic and the tragedy surrounding it, but to just briefly recap, the Titanic was the biggest, most luxurious ship of its time. To be on board the Titanic was a luxury like no other. But on April 14th, 1912 at 11:40 p.m., the Titanic would scrape along an iceberg, and by 2:20 a.m. on April 15th, the Titanic would sink under the water's surface. Because the Titanic was described as unsinkable, there weren't enough lifeboats, and out of the 2,200 passengers on board the ship, only 706 survived. So I recently learned of a book from 1898 called Futility, or The Wreck of the Titan, written by Morgan Robertson. Before we get into this book, it's important to note that this novel was written before the Titanic had even been designed. It's about an ocean liner called Titan, the greatest and most luxurious of its kind. Also the largest of its time. It was so luxurious that it was compared to a first-class hotel. The Titan was described as among the greatest works of men, but it was also described as unsinkable. Now in April, around midnight, in the North Atlantic, the Titan would strike an iceberg and wind up sinking. And I'm sure, as you guessed, because it was described as unsinkable, there weren't enough lifeboats, which would cause the death of many. If we backtrack for a moment, at 11:40 p.m. on April 14th, the Titanic would scrape against an iceberg and wind up sinking, also in the North Atlantic. So now both ships strike an iceberg around midnight in April in the North Atlantic and wind up sinking. But the similarities go far deeper than even just that. Firstly, let's talk about the name. I found it eerily similar as, right off the bat, the Titan and the Titanic. Both ships were also both British-owned steel vessels. The length of the Titan was 800 feet and the length of the Titanic was 882 feet. The speed at which the Titan hit the iceberg was 25 knots and the speed at which the Titanic hit the iceberg was 22.5 knots. The Titan had 2,500 passengers on board and the Titanic had 2,200 passengers on board, but both were able to hold 3,000 passengers. Both sank in the North Atlantic exactly 400 nautical miles from Newfoundland, and both were considered unsinkable due to their watertight compartments and doors within them. Now, the Titanic had what was considered a phenomenal feature of its time, which was that the watertight doors would close automatically should water flood the area. But the Titan also had that 14 years earlier. And they both didn't have enough lifeboats. The Titan had 24 lifeboats and the Titanic had just 20. And both of their lack of lifeboats would lead to tragic deaths of many passengers on board. I know what you guys are thinking. The similarities are just outrageous. It's so mind-blowing how similar these details are. It was in April. It was in the exact same area of the ocean by the exact same cause at around the exact same time. They both didn't have lifeboats. They were both the greatest ships of their time. It is ridiculous how similar this is considering the novel was written about 14 years earlier. It's mind-blowing. But there were some differences between the novel and the sinking of the Titanic. The Titanic sunk on her maiden voyage, whereas the Titan was on its third voyage. And the Titan's sinking left only 13 survivors, whereas the sinking of the Titanic left around 706 survivors. The Titan also actually capsized before sinking, whereas the Titanic was split in two before sinking. So obviously when the sinking of the Titanic occurred and people reflected back on this novel, there were plenty of questions as to how he could have known these details 14 years prior. As I said, he'd written this prior to the Titanic even being built. Some people speculated that he must be psychic. He must have seen the sinking of the Titanic prior to it even being built and knew this was going to happen and wrote about it. While others said maybe he was a time traveler. Now, while plenty of people were going between these two theories, there were also people who believed that this just proved the sinking of the Titanic was planned and he knew of all of this prior. But in life, there are so many novels and shows and things that are released prior to tragedies where you have to look back and think, how could they have possibly known this? It makes no sense. So you're probably wondering what Morgan Robertson had to say about all these speculations when it appeared what he wrote about came to life. Morgan claimed he had extensive knowledge of shipbuilding and had done extensive research into ships. He also was the son of a ship captain and grew up as a cabin boy before becoming first mate on a merchant ship. So he explained that in his knowledge, he just knew how something of this nature would go, and that was what he wrote about, that he didn't write about the Titanic and what would come in the future. But to me, when I kind of go through the list of all the similarities, despite their differences, it really does seem as though it was written about what would occur on the Titanic. I mean, I know it's the most minor of details, but even the fact that Titan is in Titanic is eerie enough to me. It's almost like he gave a shortened version of the ship to not give it away too much, if that makes sense. Now, on March 24th, 1915, at age 53, Morgan Robertson was found dead in his hotel room of a suspected overdose. And since then, nobody knows how this book seems to have predicted what occurred on the Titanic. Nobody knows how the similarities were so similar as far as the tragedy that would later occur. And people to this day still wonder, was he a time traveler who wrote of future events with little minor details so it wasn't too obvious? Or was he perhaps psychic and did he foresee all of the events? Some people also wonder if it does have to do with the conspiracy that the Titanic was in fact sunk on purpose. If you guys want me to dive into that video, I can do a separate video on the Titanic conspiracy and the theory behind it, that it was sunk on purpose. I would love to dive into that, but people think perhaps he knew of that ahead of time and wrote about what would be planned, or others think that people looked to his book in the future and kind of used it as a guidance as to what to do, but nobody knows. I would seriously love to know what you guys think of this. I'm so curious to read through the comments down below, because when I learned of this, I couldn't believe it. It has had my mind racing pretty much all day since I've been planning on filming this video. I'm sitting here like, but how could he have known this? But why is this so similar? How is it possible out of the entire ocean, that was where he chose to have the ship sink after hitting an iceberg in April around midnight, when the Titanic would hit an iceberg at 20 to 12 a.m. in the same area in April? It's just the details, guys. I don't know what to make of it. So I'm so very curious to hear from you guys down below what you guys think of today's video. And that is basically it. I hope that you guys enjoyed it, and I hope that you guys are looking forward to my content, because I have some crazy cases and a whole bunch of stuff to dive into with you guys in my upcoming videos. So if you guys are new to my channel or you are just not yet subscribed, but you do enjoy my videos, I would seriously love it if you would go ahead and click that subscribe button, and please give this video a big thumbs up if you did enjoy it. Remember, my loves, do all things with kindness, and until next time, I love you guys. Bye guys.